Welcome to Unlapped. Sir Lewis Hamilton. I don't know if I need to say more than that. We're back on here Unlapped after what was a very exciting race in Silverstone. Katie George, Laurence Edmondson, Nate Saunders. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, like this video, leave us a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to ESPN for more F1 content. And if you're listening, hit us with a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. All right, let's get into it. Both of you were on the ground in Silverstone last weekend. Laz, initial thoughts of watching all of that play out and Lewis Hamilton taking his first race win since Saudi Arabia in 2021.
It was very special. It's actually quite hard not to get involved with the Lewis Hamilton emotion that was clearly coming out. There was tears in the cockpit as he crossed the line and was talking to his race engineer, Bono, on the way back. And then, of course, his father was there waiting for him in Park for May. We've seen that a number of times over the years, be it when he won his first race, his first title, and then even when he lost the championship in Abu Dhabi in 2021, his dad was there to give him a hug and a few words in the air, and it's the same again. So, yeah, it just meant so much to him. And for a driver that's won so many races, you know, this 104th Grand Prix win, it was kind of strange for it to have that extra added emotion. And he even said afterwards, this one just felt so different to the rest because, of course, as you say, Saudi Arabian Grand Prix 2021, 945 days wait for a win, and in that time everything that's happened, you know, the loss of that title in Abu Dhabi and how difficult that was for him to get over. Again, when he was speaking afterwards, he said that he thought he got over it when he went back in 2022, but then quickly realized he hadn't. And so this whole cathartic kind of release when he won that race at Silverstone, of course, his home Grand Prix as well, 9th time he's won that race, which is more than any driver at a single circuit in F1 history. There was just so much to it. And also for the fans as well, to see a Brit win the British Grand Prix. It's always special when there's a home winner. We had the same with Charles Leclerc in Monaco. But yeah, for it to be Lewis, I think was really quite special. I don't want to sound like a fanboy here, but I think it really was very special. And I completely get, you know, the scenes and all the emotion that went around it, because it was a special moment.
Well, it also seemed like it was special for him and Mercedes, because obviously we know Lewis Hamilton is moving on from Mercedes after what has been an incredible partnership between him and the franchise, the organization, Toto Wolff. But for him to get that win at Silverstone, a racetrack that means so much to him, it almost felt like tying a bow. I don't know if he's going to get more race wins this season, Nate. I don't know if George Russell's going to get more race wins for Mercedes. They're clearly trending in the right direction. But I thought for Lewis and Toto to have that moment to kind of put a bow on his career with Mercedes, I thought that was special too, on top of everything that Laz just laid out.
100%. And I think that will be what stands out now about the final years of this partnership. You're right. He might not win again this season. I think Mercedes actually now maybe, you know, they look like they're in a position to maybe be in the mix a bit more, which I know is music to your ears, especially Katie, having waited so long to see that. But yeah, I think you're right. And it didn't feel right, did it, going, you know, ahead of Silverstone, this idea that I think all of us have had for a while, you know, that he might not win again with Mercedes, you know, this incredible partnership the two of them had. I think it's about 84 wins that he's had with Mercedes, which is unbelievable when you consider Schumacher had 91 in his whole career. You know, Hamilton's had 84, I think 83, 84 with one team. Unbelievable run. And for that to have kind of just ended on a damp squib of 3 seasons without a win, it wouldn't really have been right. So yeah, I completely agree with you. And even if he doesn't win now, that, you know, the bookend of that chapter is always Silverstone 2024. Right. It doesn't matter what else happens after that. It was such a perfect moment. And I think you know, the radio message from Bono when he was like, boy, I've been waiting for this, and Toto saying, you know, we will prevail. It's just like, it's a perfect, I know they were filming a Hollywood movie, you know, that weekend, but it was perfect Hollywood kind of cinema. And I think Lewis has always been that. And just on Lawrence's point about getting swept up in the emotion of it, just more generally, how lucky have we been this year for kind of some of the feel-good moments? We had Sainz winning after appendicitis. We had Lando finally getting the win. We had Leclerc ending the curse in Monaco. We had Russell kind of getting the win back after he lost the win in Canada, obviously when Max and Lando had their collision. And now we've had this Lewis moment. It's been quite a special season when you look at all of those moments combined. And I don't want to take anything away from Max. He's had some pretty special wins as well. So yeah, it was just a really nice added chapter to what's been a really, really great season, I think, since Miami, because obviously everything's just changed around. But yeah, great for Lewis. And I had my favorite message was from my friend Simon, who's a diehard Ferrari fan. He's never really been a keen Lewis fan. So he's bracing himself for that arrival. And he messaged me and he's like, I hate myself. He's like, I got choked up when Lewis won. I said, mate, he's going to be in red soon. He's like, I know. So I think it did touch a lot of people, even if they're not the biggest Lewis fans, which I think always speaks to how big a moment is.
It was hard not to. I remember getting choked up watching Charles Leclerc finally have that moment in Monaco. And I know that this is the 9th time that Lewis Hamilton has won at Silverstone, which is remarkable in and of itself. But it felt like a long time coming for him, given, I think, all the frustrations and the challenges that he and Mercedes has faced since that 2021 season together. Laz, just curious, with the momentum that obviously Mercedes has been able to build with the upgrades, George Russell getting the win a week ago, Lewis now winning at Silverstone, what went right for him specifically on track?
It was clear that the Mercedes was very good from qualifying. Of course, they locked out the front row of the grid. We haven't seen Mercedes do that for ages now. So to then convert that into victory, it was a huge amount that needed to happen because the rain came, and at that point the McLaren looked quicker, and I think that's because the McLaren just does have more downforce. So in those conditions where they were still running slick tires in the wet, you need a huge amount of downforce working on that car to get the heat into the tires, to retain the heat, to continue the performance. So at that stage, it looked like it was slipping away. But then, of course, Mercedes got their strategy call right to go back to the slick tires. They only had the soft compound available. And remarkably, McLaren followed Lewis Hamilton with that soft compound decision when they could have gone with medium. Mercedes didn't have the mediums available. And then it was all about, can the two of them, Lewis Hamilton and Lando Norris, hold off Max Verstappen, who was looking incredibly quick in the Red Bull and coming pretty fast from behind. And then Lewis's ability there to make those soft tires last that stint, look after them enough so that he had enough to push at the end. It was pretty special. And that's the kind of thing that perhaps we haven't seen from Lewis Hamilton for some time now, when the car's not been acting as he wanted, and when the best that they could achieve was maybe 5th place, 4th place. It felt like sometimes Lewis had kind of lost interest in it a bit, had his mind focused on Ferrari the following year. But then all of a sudden, it comes alive, and he comes alive because he can sense that victory. And that was often the case even in those years, of dominance. If Mercedes had a slightly tricky weekend, or the championship was already sealed, sometimes Lewis's performances slightly went off the boil. But as soon as you present that victory in front of him, he's still got this huge hunger, and of course the natural ability to go and chase it. So I think that's what was so special about the performance.
Yeah, it really was. God, it was a great race. And Nate, as you laid out kind of all the different marquee wins that we've seen, it's been an amazing season. I think we've waited for a long time to get a season like this. And I know we've talked about the regulation changes coming, but I feel like we're
because
rewarded finally. I know.
It was so bad for 5 races. It was kind of like one-sided, and it's just flipped around.
Yeah, it has. And it's been a lot of fun to see. Interesting note. Now officially 3 British drivers have won a race this season. This is the first time this has happened for any country in the 21st century. Do you guys find that surprising?
How often do you have drivers from the same country on the grid? I think there's a much wider variety of drivers than perhaps there have been at times in the past from different nations. So first of all, you've got to have you've got to have 3 drivers from a single country on the grid in a season, and then they've got to be in relatively competitive cars. And we know from recent history how difficult it is sometimes to win if you're in a car that's not got the potential. So I don't know. I don't think that's that amazing a stat. If it was the first time ever in Formula One, I'd be like, okay, that's perhaps slightly different. But yeah, in the 21st century, I don't know. We know how dominated seasons have been during that period, either with Ferrari early on, and then Red Bull, and then Mercedes, and then Red Bull again. So yeah, perhaps not the most surprising stat.
Lando, George, and Lewis. Is there any other British driver that, well, I'm trying to go through the list. Is there any other British driver on the grid at the moment?
No, not officially. I mean, Alex
Okay.
Albon is British, but he races as under the Thai flag, so
Right.
the stats would say he was a Thai winner if and when he wins.
And there aren't three other drivers from a single country to represent anybody else, right? You have two Spanish drivers. I'm not missing a
Top of my
third.
head, no. Yeah, I think you're right. Two Spaniards, one German. There's always been a few German drivers in my time in, but now we've just got Hulkenberg. Unless I'm missing something really obvious.
Now I'm doing a geographical test to both
Yeah.
of you. I'll tell Dave that you thought that the stat, Dave, our lovely producer.
I like the stat, Casey. And
You
Dave.
like it? Okay.
I
So
like
we're
it.
split.
I like
We're
it.
split decision on the pod of like, it's okay. And no, we like it. I just thought it was interesting to throw it out there. First time in the 21st century, not the first time ever, Laz. We mentioned McLaren earlier, and Nate, you've got a great article on ESPN.com right now that everybody should check out. Kind of feels like we've entered this, I don't want to say era, but like phase of the season where it's like what might have been for McLaren. I feel like they've lost out on a couple of huge opportunities to win races. Obviously, Lando Norris has felt that way from a time or two. What made Silverstone such a disappointing race for McLaren?
Yeah, I think the narrative has started to shift. What made it so disappointing was the fact that they didn't just blunder once; they kind of did it twice on both cars, and they took both cars out of the running of winning the race. Again, through small decisions, but as we've seen time and time again, and we've said it a bunch of times on this pod, all those small things add up to make the win. And if you get one of those, if you're lacking, you can fall short. And that's why Red Bull has been such an impressive operation for so long. There was a really telling quote from Oscar Piastri, which I put in this article that you mentioned, Katie. He said, "We got everything right." It's annoying because we got every single call right on the day, except the pit call. And the call he's referring to is the decision not to double stack him with Lando early in that race. Laurence mentioned earlier about the switch over from the softs to the intermediate wet tire. I think it was about the 19th lap that happened. And kind of inexplicably, really, because, often they say the best way to tell if it's raining in a Formula One race is to look outside. From where we were sat in the media center, you could look out and the rain had clearly started bucketing down in a way that it hadn't been a lap or two before. And Lando comes into the pits, Piastri stays out, and the two Mercedes drivers come straight into the pits. And I think the Mercedes team have really owned the double stack for years. Like, they've always done it. They've always been very, very confident double stacking. And obviously what you do in that situation is you've got to kind of explain to the driver behind, look, you did lose some time in the double stack, granted, but we kind of controlled the time you lost. We knew how much it was going to be. We got you out there quickly. The lap that Piastri did, he said to us, as soon as he got round that first corner, not even the first corner, the last corner after the pit exit, he knew it was the wrong call. And what it did was it took him completely out of the race. He finished about 12 seconds behind Lewis. So if you take that extra lap out, I didn't work out exactly how much time he lost, but he would at least have been in the mix to have done something, because what happened later, and this is why it's so important to have two cars up at the front end of the grid in case something does happen, is then Mercedes kind of outthought McLaren, got Lewis in a lap earlier for the switch back to the softs. And as Laurence pointed out, that's when McLaren very bizarrely kind of chose to copy the Mercedes call and go onto the softs themselves and not onto the medium tire, which they had. Now, the lap later probably meant they got out behind Lewis. Maybe it's give and take. Lando overshot the pit box as well. But again, tiny margins, tiny little things, moments in races that have cost them a win. And I remember when we left Miami, it was so exciting. It was like, finally, McLaren have broken through. Lando's broken through. They've got this win. We had Imola, where he was just 0.2 seconds behind Max, and you thought maybe if he'd qualified pole, he might have won that race. But still, it was like McLaren's in the ascendancy now. There's been 3 races since then you can point at and said McLaren should have won that race. Silverstone was one of them. Canada, you can debate about that safety car, but had they been a bit bolder and said come straight in, I forget exactly how the timing worked with that, but I remember they said they felt afterwards we could have won the race in that moment. And then obviously Austria, which was the Max collision, and I'm forgetting Spain as well, where Lando had the slow start. You had all these things together, and you mentioned the article I wrote. Laurence wrote one. I forget the break. I think it was after Canada, of all the points that Lando has dropped, in these moments, the points he could have gained on Max. And when you actually start adding them up, it's tangible, because obviously Max is 80 something points away in the championship. if McLaren had won just 2 of those races, suddenly you're looking at low 70s for that. Maybe you get into the 60s, and then suddenly a retirement or 2 for Max is way more costly, is way more, is way more expensive in the championship. And I think, and you guys jump in here if you disagree, but I think you can see it across sports. It very quickly, not winning can get into your psyche just as quickly as winning can. You become a winning team, you become a winning operation. Mercedes made a ballsy call. They said, let's double stack. It might have been easier because they saw that Piastri stayed out, but by then they'd have made the call. They were committed to it. And we heard Red Bull hear from Verstappen and say, I want the intermediates. They came in. Sorry, and just to double back, the thing that was really remarkable, I thought, was we heard Norris's radio where they said, do you want to cover Lewis or do you want to cover Max? And Lando's radio was like, well, let's cover Lewis. Yeah, let's cover Lewis. And then he pauses and says, or let's cover Max. I'm happy with either way. And it just doesn't seem like an operation where they're like, let's take the bold decisions we need to win the race. And ultimately, that's where a team that's been so far out of step with winning races, I think you start to see that mentality. So it's obviously a great situation to be in because they have a car quick enough to win. So it's not all doom and gloom, but yeah, you start doing this too much. And who knows, Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari could all take a step and suddenly you find yourself third in the competitive order, not second or not first. And you look at that spell. I mean, look at Aston Martin last year, for example. At this point in the season, they were regularly getting podiums still, or maybe at this point it started to tail off, but they started looking back and thinking, oh man, like that didn't last forever, us being a podium team, and suddenly you slip away. So I think McLaren could really look back at this spell with a lot of regret because there's just wins on the table that they haven't taken. And yeah, Mercedes now, have maybe entered that fray as well. So really frustrating because I think all of us want McLaren to be up there. Lando has been driving so well this season, maybe with a few mistakes. And if we do get this perfect setup in 2025 where all these teams are close together, McLaren have to have their act together in these moments because these moments in other seasons will win and lose you championships in an instant. You just can't be getting them wrong. So yeah, it's Silverstone was really frustrating, but I think it's just following a long list of things they've got wrong, and they just need to get out of that habit quickly.
I was surprised because we've talked about how the Drivers' Championship doesn't really look like it's on, but given how competitive it is, you'd think the Constructors' Championship would be. And I went to check the points tallies after Silverstone, just thinking McLaren would be second by now because
they're not
this really strong performance, and they're not. They're third. Okay, only 7 points behind Ferrari, but I just feel like that really underlines the missed opportunities that they've had. And it often seems with Oscar as well, they've had a few mistakes. There's the obvious ones with Lando where small little things have made the difference, and often it's actually been because Red Bull and Max have been so perfect that McLaren have kind of been shown slightly lacking, not because they didn't do a good job, but they just didn't do an exceptional job like Max and Red Bull. But yeah, I think the difference is that this is a team that for a long time, several years now, a kind of 5th place or 4th place would be a good result, and the occasional podium was a good result. And when you're fighting for 4th place downwards and you miss an opportunity or you mess up a pit stop or you get the strategy slightly wrong and the driver finishes 7th instead of 4th or 5th, and afterwards everyone in the team knows they messed up, but it doesn't really get much scrutiny from outside, and so these things kind of pass. And I think obviously every team will look back at what they did wrong and how they could have maximized their points, but quite often it's just a bit of it didn't quite work out that day. But now when they make those mistakes, there's victories on the line and they're not getting them. And there's this extra pressure that builds up. And like Nate said, it just all adds and adds and adds. And then when you've got to make those really tricky calls, you've got to make the right decision in that moment. It's sometimes that extra pressure leads it to be incorrect or certainly kind of makes it less clear which way they should go. So I think, this one quite obviously was a missed opportunity. It really did seem a lot like Canada, where Lando in the wet there as well was looking super competitive, and then it was just a bit of a mess up around the timing of pit stops, and then the tires they were on at the end to defend. And for Lando to go from leading that race down to 3rd at the finish behind Max, who at the start had not looked very competitive. The Red Bull did not look great in the first half of that race. It was only in that final stint at the end when he was on hard tires and chasing down Lando and Lewis, that all of a sudden he looked like the Max that, you know, we've come to expect from earlier in the season. So yeah, to not take advantage on a weekend when Red Bull clearly weren't at their best, that's going to hurt them quite a lot.
Speaking of Red Bull, we discussed the driver market quite a bit on this show. Liam Lawson, a name that we've discussed quite a bit, will have an opportunity to get behind the wheel of the RB20 this week. We're excited to see how he does, certainly. But I'm just curious, depending on the results of his testing, can we have a conversation about, in light of like recent events, does he actually have a real shot at getting a permanent seat with Red Bull or VCarb as soon as next season? Because I think that it's fair to say there's some questions about the extension that was given to Sergio Perez with Red Bull. I think there's some questions still looming about Daniel Ricciardo's future with the team. Do we think Liam Lawson has a chance if he tests well, Nate?
Yeah, I really do. But that is the key question: is which one does he have the bigger chance of? Because I think you're right. You know, the future of Ricciardo seems pretty, I would say, not uncertain, but it's hard to see it. The Perez situation has really changed, and
It has.
Red Bull is in this situation now where clearly Perez, something has happened with Perez, confidence-wise, he's shot. And I think they thought giving him this extension would be like, okay, he kicks on, he's fine. It's done the opposite. He's gone the other direction. And we alluded to the Constructors' Championship earlier. McLaren and Ferrari should both be looking at that and thinking, well, Perez is there, we can win that championship, because Max is basically fighting with one hand behind his back for the rest of the season. So yeah, Lawson has a great chance. And I think the reason there's obviously huge parallels here, it was around the same time last year that we had the Daniel Ricciardo test at Silverstone. That was a bit more savage. That was, he tested the car, Helmut Marko picked up the phone and said to Nick de Vries, get out of here. You're not racing for us anymore. I don't think we'll get it that clear cut either way, but I think that what this will do is it will give Red Bull a very good indication of where Liam Lawson is. He knows what's riding on this test. It's very obvious. It is a test they can kind of couch and say, well, it was already planned. It's one of the promotional days, blah, blah, blah. It was the same with Ricciardo, and they're looking at certain laps, certain metrics, certain times, and they want to see, certain things out of him. But I think that really the next two races will determine which seat, if either, he is taking. And I think, I don't know, it's just a strange situation, because obviously they brought Ricciardo back and he was meant to be the guy that was kind of the safety net for Perez. That hasn't worked out. And now you have a situation where the safety net and the guy that the safety net was brought in to protect are both on the outs. And for whatever reason, I mean, we've talked about it before, Yuki Tsunoda must have insulted Christian Horner in another life sometime, because he just does not seem to have any chance of getting into that team. He does seem to be the obvious solution from the outside. But yeah, so to go back to the original question, Katie, Lawson has a great chance of getting in. I think what we're going to follow over the next kind of 14 days is exactly which seat that is. I was speaking to some guys close to Ricciardo. I know the guys that represent Ricciardo really well. They're still pretty confident, I think, about things. And I think that the magnitude of the Perez situation and the importance of that for Red Bull, my prediction would be, we'll keep Ricciardo safe, because why replace Ricciardo when, let's face it, AlphaTauri, they're not really scoring huge amounts of points at the moment. The bigger concern for them is
VCarb.
Sorry, VCarb. They say that as well. They at the team, they're like, call us VCarb. I'm like, no, call you RB. And so I think that does that make sense? Like the magnitude of the Perez situation, I think will end up meaning that Ricciardo's safe longer term, because Red Bull cannot afford to get that wrong. I think you can afford to leave Ricciardo in that seat and see where he goes. And they can also kind of point to the fact that, you talk to people at VCarb and they will say that the marketing power of Ricciardo is still pretty good. Like they still get a fair amount for that, given what that team is. The Perez situation is where it's like, you get this wrong and the Constructors' Championship's on the line. Now, I'll pass this over to Laz, because I don't want to talk for too long. I'm not convinced that Liam Lawson is necessarily the answer to the Perez situation, because you're putting in a guy who's completely untested, looked very good when he replaced Ricciardo in those 3 races last season, but it's a huge ask. And a lot of people say, well, look, Ollie Behrman did well for Ferrari. Very different stepping in for one race when you know it's one race as a young driver, and suddenly then being like, now you have to replace a guy for the season. You're in the championship fight. And
so by the way, your teammate's Max Verstappen.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
to me seems the most daunting for a rookie, Laz.
Yeah. the teammate killer.
Yeah, he is. I mean, that's the thing. If you look at the recent history at Red Bull, you had Pierre Gasly look pretty much washed up when he left Red Bull at the end of that period there, got demoted down. Of course, Alex Albon got promoted up. Again, after a while got moved on for Perez because Red Bull didn't think that he was up to it. And this is a danger, is that no matter which driver you put in there, it's a difficult situation. But a young driver who, in Lawson's case, is coming off, a few races experience last year, replacing Daniel Ricciardo in an AlphaTauri. Okay, he did very well, but that's such a different ball game to coming into the fastest car on the grid up against Max Verstappen at a time when, okay, it is probably still the fastest car on the grid, but all the other teams are nipping at your heels. So it doesn't take much to drop from what, in a kind of dominant year would be second place on the grid. And that can quite quickly become 8th or 9th on the grid. And then all of a sudden you're in that spiral of, okay, we're going to have to change the strategy to push forward. We're going to have to take some risks, as we saw with Checo, who obviously went out in Q1 in Silverstone, then started from the back of the grid. Taking those risks just amplified the disaster that was his weekend. And he ended up 2 laps down and in 17th place or whatever it was. So it's a huge risk to throw Liam Lawson in mid-season. And I don't think it'll come to that, but I think what they're trying to do is that, Red Bull school of tough love is that they're trying to sharpen Perez up as much as possible by saying, look, this guy has literally driven your car, albeit it's only for, I think, 34 laps maximum they can do with that filming day at Silverstone. So it's not going to really be enough to know, and it's not as much as Daniel Ricciardo did last year before he got moved into the AlphaTauri. That was a full Pirelli tire test day. It's not that, it is less than that. So yeah, to then make a decision based on that, I think is probably a little bit too much. But what they're expecting is Perez to show in these next 2 races before the summer break, Hungary and Spa, that he has still got it, that he can get the kind of performances Red Bull need from it in the Constructors' Championship, like I was saying earlier, to fend off the likes of Ferrari and McLaren through to the end of this year, and then same again into 25. And really, they just want to try and figure out how they can jolt Perez back into a position where he's performing as he should do, because the start of this year was pretty good. He was regularly second place, didn't look too far off Max Verstappen in terms of a percentage of the lap time in qualifying. Things looked like they were starting to go back his way, but now it just seems like everyone is at a loss to explain what has gone wrong for Checo, and even more so, how does he turn it around? No one seems to have the right idea of how to do that, including Checo himself. And so, it's a really tricky situation. But I think changing drivers mid-season, it's always such a risk. I'm trying to think back to last time where somebody got changed mid-season and it was a huge success. The obvious one being Max Verstappen in 2016, went from Toro Rosso back then up to Red Bull. But, Max is an exceptional talent.
Shows you how rare it is. The fact that it's Max.
I think they're rare at the time. And also he had done, it wasn't half season at that point, it was about 5 races in a Toro Rosso. So it wasn't like just coming in completely cold, which is what.
And the Mercedes drivers took themselves out in the race. It was a great win, but a lot of things conspired together in that one. So
but Max was great immediately. Yeah. So unless they think they're in that situation, then. Yeah, and I just don't think you can expect that of Liam. It's not like he did a load of testing earlier this year. He's just doing these little pieces where he can fit in the car. He can't even do FP1 sessions anymore because he's done too many races to qualify for doing an FP1 session as a young driver. So, yeah, I think it would be a huge amount to ask of Liam, and it probably wouldn't be the best career move for him either.
And if they were convinced he was the right guy, he wouldn't be in the situation he's currently in. You know what I mean? He wouldn't be sitting on the sidelines. As I said, this guy's so good, we've got to give him one of our seats. So, yeah, it does seem like a weird situation. Just to add to everything Laurence said, Silverstone, definitely, you could tell the mood at Red Bull towards Perez had changed. I know that after qualifying, Horner had a very tense conversation with some of the engineers who were just like, this is bad. And I think what one of them said to him, or what I was told secondhand, but the person I heard it from, I trust was, was actually, in a room where they could hear what was happening in this conversation. And the discussion was, even if we do see a turnaround in Budapest or Spa, what's the guarantee that the form doesn't then just spiral again? Because one result with Perez, we've seen it before, haven't we? We've seen him have a good race and everyone says, oh, Perez is back, and then he goes away again. So I just don't know, in such a long season and in such a season when there's so many races back to back to back, I just can't see him getting through it. So if you're Red Bull now, I completely agree with everything Laurence said. Changing a driver mid-season is almost as calamitous if you get it wrong as keeping a guy who has won races for you, who is a good driver. He's just, in horrible form right now. So I don't know how they solve it at all.
I feel like Sergio Perez has certainly had the most stability of Max's teammate over the last however many years. I feel like this all kind of spiraled, or the domino effect took place when Daniel Ricciardo decided to change and move to Renault. And now it feels like ever since then, they haven't necessarily gotten it right with the number 2 driver next to Max. But I don't know if necessarily they have to get it right because Max is so damn good. They just need somebody who's somewhat consistent and stable. And I don't feel like Sergio Perez has provided that this season in particular. And we obviously saw volatility last season as well.
I mean, this is the problem with having this problem with having a driver as good as Max Verstappen is that no matter what you do from that period, I mean, one of the reasons Daniel Ricciardo wanted to leave is because he didn't think that going up against Max at Red Bull would be, a fair fight for him, because the team naturally gravitated around Max Verstappen because he was so good. And so as soon as you have that situation where you have a driver that talented, then naturally the whole team is going to, work to support them. Finding a second driver to balance that out or to work as an effective teammate is really difficult. And, I think Valtteri Bottas at Mercedes actually did a pretty good job in those in those circumstances. It's very, very similar. And there were times when people were looking at Valtteri and they were like, what on earth is going wrong with this guy? But I think when you're up against a driver who's that good, be it Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, it is so difficult, and also so difficult mentally to get yourself back in a position where, you can just qualify a tenth of a second off and be content with that. These drivers don't really work like that. So they then try and find extra temps here and there and try to make up that difference. And then it often spirals the other way. And then all of a sudden, you're several places back on the grid and your teammates right at the front. And so, yeah, I don't know how they solved that. And it seemed like Checo, at one stage, it did seem like he was a good solution for that issue. But the other thing which Checo slightly referenced in Silverstone has been the case at other races, is that there was a new flaw at Silverstone, and it was on Max's car and it wasn't on Checo's car, and Checo will get it in Hungary. But those small little things as well start to play against you as well. So if you're already naturally a tenth of a second, 2 tenths off, and then there's an extra couple of hundredths here or half a tenth there because of the best parts are going to your teammate, it does all just kind of get away from a driver so quickly. And the mental fortitude needed to just carry on and just grind out solid results is tough. So yeah, I don't know who would actually be best placed to do that job, and really who on the grid would be willing to do that job, because it's a pretty thankless task.
It is a thankless task. And I was just thinking at another point to make, but just on that, if you look back at F1 history, you look at dominant champions, every F1 fan can it's almost like a pub quiz. You can name who the number 2 driver was. You've got Barrichello was Schumacher's number 2. You had Webber was Vettel's number 2. Bottas was Lewis's. Perez is Max. Like, I think for these guys as well, that part of it as well, it's kind of a rough reality that your legacy is going to be that you were the backup to a guy who was dominating and rewriting the history books. Just wanted to say something quickly, because we were talking about it before we recorded, Katie, just about the contracts, just in case people wondered how this would be to do. This is really easy for Red Bull to actually move these guys about if they need to, because the great thing about having 2 teams that you own is that the contracts you own as well. So I saw a lot of people saying, well, how would they cut Perez's contract? I'm pretty sure Perez's existing deal has clauses in it of, that give him a lot of outs, but also Red Bull a lot of outs. So if he's, say, 100 points behind Verstappen, just to pluck that out of the air, which I think he is, that's been suggested is a clause that is existing. So they would very easily be able to get rid of Perez. And Lawson's deal is currently a Red Bull driver deal. I think they would just basically escalate the salary. You would rewrite bits of it, but all you would have to do is basically give him a fresh looking contract to do that. So in that situation, it's easy for Red Bull, but that's probably the only easy bit of it for them. But
But
I just want to point that out. Yeah.
Yuki Tsunoda's, is it a V carb specific or is it a Red Bull contract that
No,
he can be? I know you said that likelihood of that happening is probably small, but could he seamlessly be moved into that second seat with Red Bull with a V carb contract?
So the way I understand it, you sign a wider Red Bull deal, and then so when Ricciardo signed with VCarb, he basically then signed an agreement saying you will drive at VCarb for the next year with an option year. But Red Bull could quite easily just say that no longer exists. Your main contract now, you're going to the team. It's why when Verstappen stepped up, they were just able to say you're now going up. It doesn't really. It's very easy for them to do. So Yuki, that's the other frustrating thing. Yuki, they could just move Yuki up and Perez down. I mean, I think if they move Perez down, he'd be like, see you later. I'm off. I don't think he'd want to stick around to drive the AlphaTauri. I mean, maybe he would, but it'd be pretty difficult to see how he came back from that. But yeah, they could do it with Yuki. They could do it with Lawson. They could still do it with Ricciardo. I doubt they will. I mean, you guys know that I would like that to be the outcome, but I just, out of all of them, I think that's probably the least likely, which is remarkable given that 12 months ago we were getting excited at this very time because we thought Ricciardo's comeback meant he was next in line. Now he seems to be third of three with, and barely able to potentially see him staying beyond the summer break. So yes, it's kind of remarkable how that's all flipped around so quickly.
What do you guys think about this? And hear me out for that second seat for Red Bull, because I just watched a riveting movie trailer over the weekend. And I feel like if Brad Pitt decides to retire from acting in Hollywood at age 50, however old he is, based on the driving I saw in that trailer, boys, I think he could sit in that seat. Did you guys see it?
I saw him collide with his teammate. That's the last thing you want. That's the last thing you need out of him right now.
You don't want
the marketing value. Think of the marketing value.
That's
the sponsors you bring in as Brad
Pitt. Who's Daniel Ricciardo if you got Brad Pitt
on
the grid?
Katie, you got to give him the real name. His name's Sonny Hayes. Okay, and he's a comeback driver.
Okay,
and he's back again. He's back to fulfill his F1 dream of winning races. I guess I think is the storyline.
Is it because there was no plot alluded to? Like in the trailer, there was no plot. There was only like one bit of dialogue that was a little bit cringy. I thought when they were
who said anything about safe?
Yeah,
which is
yeah, that was the only dialogue you got in the trailer. Like the trailer overall was very good. I thought it was aesthetically pretty and great shots like that they've put together over time at these F1 racetracks. And he's standing on the grid next to Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez in a bit of the trailer. So is it actually called F1? Like there's no, that's the title. It's just F1.
It is. Yeah.
It's the logo movie, we can call it, because it's just the F1 logo is on the poster. We have different opinions on this, me and Laz. I'll let Laurence defend it being called F1.
Well, I think if you're everyone's going to call it the F1 movie anyway, right? No matter what you call it, you could call it anything. Everyone's going to be, well, have you seen the F1 movie? And then, of course, from an F1 perspective, to have your brand underneath Brad Pitt's face, plastered all over every major city, outside every cinema, in the world, pretty much, that's kind of pretty good marketing value. So I completely understand why they've called it that. I'm genuinely worried about the dialogue though. That opening scene, and this is the one they've picked. This is the one they've picked to present this movie to the world. And not only is it cringy, like how am I going to make it safe? Not only is it Brad Pitt mansplaining to the female technical director what they need from the car, it's also just wildly incorrect. I mean, the dialogue is like Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, Aston, now McLaren, all have us beat on the straight. Our shot is battling them in the turns. It's just like, what does that even mean?
Wait, Laz. And he needs a car built for knowledge.
I left that bit out because that's just totally absurd. But anyone with an ounce of knowledge about kind of how a Formula One car works, everyone knows you can make it very fast in the straight just by reducing the the downforce on it, the drag on it, and then to make it fast in the turn. It's just like, come on, this is really quite quite cringy, worrying stuff for an F1 film. But I guess it's Hollywood, and that's maybe.
So I think a lot of it's going to be like that, because I think that if you watch like Top Gun Maverick, so it's Joe Kosinski, isn't it, is the director. Jerry Bruckheimer's produced it. Lewis Hamilton's actually advised on the script, which makes lines like that quite surprising, because they said they'd ran everything through him, and him suggesting to his engineer, let's make an unsafe car. Maybe I'm not sure if Lewis has ever done that in his career. Maybe he has. I don't know. But I think I think a lot of it will be like that because I think it's going to be hammed up. It's going to be Hollywoodized, which is fine. That's what it's about. But I think that the big debate around the film will be the race scenes do look great. I think the technology
They do.
that, and we've had a bit of insight into some of that, and it sounds like technology nowadays is just insane. When you look at, when you go back and you look at Star Wars, George Lucas filming all of that stuff in a little soundstage to make some of the special effects in Star Wars, in 1977. What they're doing now with movies is just unbelievable. So I think that side of it will be really amazing. But if the dialogue's bad, if you're suddenly a movie where people are like making memes out of how bad the dialogue is, I think that quite quickly supersedes how good that is, because for a lot of people, they'll say, well, I don't need to see great racing scenes because I can go, like Rush has great racing scenes, for example, the Niki Lauda, James Hunt film. It's obviously from a different era.
But you know what also has good racing scenes? Formula One every week. And I'm not convinced
this is what I was going to say.
that these camera angles are actually going to make that big a difference, because first of all, it's all scripted anyway, so it's not actually watching racing in real life. Whereas the great thing about Top Gun is that you don't usually get to see fighter jets from those positions from inside the cockpit. That's not something that we all get to experience. Whereas every other Sunday you can turn on the TV and actually watch real life racing where it's genuine. And I don't know, all of it makes me a little bit concerned, because if they're just leaning on the racing scenes, I think no matter how good they look, it's always going to be a lot to make up for a dodgy script.
And this is where my issue with the name comes in. It's not that I think it's a great marketing tool, etc., but there's such a lack of imagination behind that name, and it just suggests to me that they're leaning on exactly that. Like, oh, we'll make F1 look really, really cool and really, really dramatic. And actually, what's been interesting about seeing Drive to Survive fans is the more knowledgeable fans have become about the product, the less they've liked Drive to Survive, because they say, well, actually, you've kind of made it very unrealistic, very aloof, very weird. And it is, Lewis has said this a few times, it's very difficult to get a racing movie right. You have to be so true to racing itself. And I don't know if you saw the Ferrari movie that came out recently. I was kind of 50-50 with it. There were some really great bits with it. But some of the racing, especially sadly, they really over-egged, I think, some of the crashes. Now, maybe it's because you don't often see that stuff, but it really takes you out of the moment, because you think, hang on a sec, like that looked a bit strange, and did they overplay that just for the drama of it? And as soon as that happens in a movie, your kind of sense of disbelief is gone. So sorry, I got that completely wrong, didn't I? Not your sense of disbelief, your sense of, I can't remember what it is. People listening hopefully understand what I mean. Suspended my belief. I can't remember what I'm trying to say.
I don't know this. I don't know this turn of phrase.
Yeah, but basically on the F1 film, Laurence saying it would have just been called the F1 movie anyway. I kind of just, because like no one says about Rush like, oh, the Niki Lauda, like you might as well have just called that the Niki Lauda movie, or called, I don't know. There's probably loads of examples like that. Like Days of Thunder is a great film, and the title Days of, it plays into the kind of the culture and the narrative of the film. And just saying F1, I just think, I'm like, there must be a better turn of phrase in the script, or a better cultural reference point that you can make to Formula One, rather than just saying, we'll just take the logo and just stick it on. But hey, I mean, from whoever came up with that from a marketing point of view, amazing, because that will be big. It will be big, even if it's a bad film. It'll be massive. I mean, to get Brad Pitt wandering around the paddock is pretty crazy. Sorry, quick aside on Brad Pitt as well. Fernando Alonso, we know, is going to be in it in an acting role. Because I saw him acting in the media pen at Silverstone. So there's I love that TikTok going around of Alonso turning around when Brad Pitt walks into the TV pen, kind of looking confused. I can tell people that is Fernando Alonso acting, because he then goes up to Brad Pitt, pats him on the back, and says, good job. He said it 3 times. And then he came around to us in the written pen and said, like, did his interview. And I asked him, we saw you doing some acting there. How was that? And he just said, did you like? Did you like? Like that? And I was like, yeah, I mean, it looked pretty good, and
if it only took him 3 takes, he must be a natural.
Yeah, absolutely. So so stuff like that is kind of cool that they're incorporating those superstars in the film. So I think that part of it is better, because you hate when they make a movie and they're like, they make up like, and now it's the Washington blah blah blahs versus the the Vegas, and you're like, these aren't real teams. Real. It takes it takes you out of it a bit.
Are you talking about Any Given Sunday? Great movie.
I am.
Here's what I would say. Great speech. Couple things. I feel like Lewis Hamilton maybe did try to say, or I would hope, hey, that's not a realistic thing that we would say. That's not really like dialogue. That's not accurate. But in Hollywood, only way to say this is they have to dumb it down for the masses, right? Like I wonder if they think like we can't get too far in the weeds technically so that, you know, they dumb it down essentially. And I don't know if that's going to be to the detriment of the movie or not. Here's my other issue. I know that Brad Pitt is a superstar. I know that he's very nice to look at. I know that people think he's a great actor. I know that we have older drivers on the grid. It's hard for me to see him standing next to a handsome driver who maybe looks like he's in his 20s in this trailer, and he's 60 years old.
Yeah.
That's not realistic to me.
But he'll be playing like a 40-year-old. You know that as well. Like that will be the
But
thing.
he's not 40, and I know he's not 40.
Yeah.
And so I
But
have a hard time getting behind that.
Yeah, it's the same thing with Tom Cruise, isn't it? In Top Gun Maverick. It's the one thing where he always says his age. You're like, dude, we all know how old you are. Just say how old you are. Like we all know. Yeah, that is funny. I think that whole part of it will be interesting because like if you are going to make it realistic, a guy that old getting into a car, he should be part of half the movie should be Brad Pitt lying on the floor saying, I can't move my neck. I'm in such pain. Please help me. While Damson Idris is kind of dancing around like, I'm all right. I'm fine. I feel good. I'm sprightly. I'm young. I'm not sure if they'll make it that dramatic. You know what I mean? Like that part of it. I'm not sure if they'll have that.
Like Brad Pitt has been driving that car. Like some films in they've got stunt drivers as well who have done a lot of the more serious driving, but Brad Pitt has been driving that car, which is a converted F2 car. So they got an F2 car and then Mercedes worked with them to basically build some body parts and made it look more like an F1 car so that it didn't look out of place while it was in the scenes with the actual F1 cars. But yeah, so that is Brad Pitt driving. And so that bit is kind of cool that you're going to have a camera pointed directly up his helmet. You'll be able to see his eyes through the visor as we saw in the trailer, and that is Brad Pitt driving that car in that moment. I think that's pretty special. So 60-year-old whatever, I think it's pretty cool that he can jump in a F2 car and go racing. But yeah, I mean, with a 60-year-old driving
coming around.
I wouldn't put it past Fernando Alonso to continue for another 20 odd years. Wow. So, maybe it's not as unrealistic as it seems.
Could you imagine? His inspiration and muse is now Brad Pitt in the F1 movie. Yeah. I can't wait for it to come out. And then all three of us will go watch it. And then we'll have an Unlapped episode dedicated to our reviews of what we thought. That'll be a heck of a lot of fun. You know what else I'm looking forward to? Here in a couple hours, we're recording this on a Wednesday morning. Here in a couple hours, you gentlemen are going to be in a pub or at a watch party watching England versus the Netherlands. How are you feeling about the upcoming semifinals of the Euros?
Yeah, this was a nice distraction from the impending doom.
Your nervousness.
Yeah, no, to be honest,
impending doom.
Don't feel too bad because at this point now, the weird thing for England fans is we're kind of used to this now. We're kind of used to getting far in competition. We just don't win them. So this part now, less nervous than it used to be. But yeah, I think when it kicks off, we'll be a wreck. I don't know how you're feeling, Laurence, but
yeah, it's been weird because I've watched the last two matches when I've been at a race circuit. So I feel like I haven't properly got into this like knockout stage of the tournament like I normally would if I'm going to watch in a pub. So it's going to be quite nice to do that side of it. But on the other hand, I don't know. When I first saw England play in the group stages, I don't think they get this far anyway. So there's a bit of me which is like, well, at least they got this far.
Do you feel like you need to drive back to Silverstone and watch it from there just because of good juju? Like
I've got the media center for me. Yeah, exactly. Standing exactly the same spot. Like,
there's a great photo. I can say it's a Quinton, our producer. Someone took a photo of us all celebrating England's winning penalty.
Yeah.
In the quarterfinal. Because there's a bunch of us who were watching it, and as the penalty started, we all stood up. Yeah, we all were swaying back and forth. So it'll be nice to watch it with a beer in hand actually this time, rather than having to then sit down and do some work after.
Yeah, well, good stuff. I've taken too much of your time. Have fun, enjoy the match. I wish you the best. Thank you as always for your analysis and your time. We will see you next week on Unlapped. Cheers, guys.